today as we pick up. Happy New Year to everybody. It's almost February, but Happy New Year. As we look at where we are and movement, want to have some conversation around some of the next steps for where we need to go and what action we need to begin to take. And so Marla's done a good job of kind of recapturing where we were and then kind of identifying some places for us to have some good dialogue on. And so I just kind of want to kick off that conversation for us this morning so that we can make sure that we are headed along the path that we all think we should be, and then taking the action in the appropriate areas. And so with that, one of the first places is in terms of determining how to use the recommendations from Housing NOLA. I think it was really good conversation, some great recommendations came out of that. But at the end of the day, it comes in terms of our how and what do we do as we move forward there. And as we talked in that, but we didn't get a chance to deal with, and this is aside from what we have here. One of the things that we did talk about was how this work could begin to be facilitated through our subcommittees and our subgroups. And so I think that's something for us to talk to in terms of, as we've identified specific objectives, where does that need to live within our work? How are we going to shift that into some of our group work to make sure that we are continuing to push forward in some of those areas? Because I think as we look at these specific outline questions here, they all fall somehow into one of those subgroups. And I think that's something for us to have a conversation about. But those questions, again, are seeking, obtaining technical assistance, determining the funding, our communication and outreach, and then, identifying potential organizational entities. And so I'll pause that just for us to kind of recap and have some conversation at the top about our next steps on creating that multi-year housing plan. And Marla, before we jump into the conversation, not sure if you want to add anything about what that would look like from a city and council perspective on the housing plan itself. You were muted.
One of the things I'm hoping for is that the city council will give a formal endorsement, if you will, of us taking on the work of kind of initiating or spearheading the process to create the plan. So that was one of the reasons why too I thought it was important that for instance, Derwin brought the information item, which was in December, which was actually kind of like your annual report, where it really spelled out a lot of the recommendations and so forth that we received, so that they could understand kind of big picture what we were talking about in terms of some goals. So the council is having a workshop. It'll be televised, but it is just actually a workshop. There'll be some consultants who will come in and share some information, really to talk about, what is affordable housing, why we need it, how do we go about getting it, and how do we preserve what we have, things of that nature. And from there, I think that the part of the goal there was making sure all council members were kind of the same understanding about this work in general, but then, recognizing two things. One, that they were committed to using some of the American Rescue Plan Act dollars for affordable housing. Okay, so then how do we start to get our minds around the way that should happen? But then also, what is the overarching strategy to get to the number of units that we say we need to address? So coming out of that meeting, what I'm hoping is that if there's not a commitment made in the meeting, then be it some kind of resolution or something, maybe in March, that the council adopts and kind of gives the green light that together, the city council endorses and supports what the coalition's doing, and we need to formalize the work. So that's kind of what I'm looking at is some of what will come out of the workshop, which is February 28th. And like I said, it will be televised, but it'll be a workshop, so it won't be like a public hearing where people can make comments or participate in that regard. I think they call it a committee of the whole is what that will be. So I will pause there, Derwin, with those comments.
Marla, does that mean that we have to hold off on, or we need to hold off on kind of advancing any of the plan proposals until we have that approval or sign off by council?
I wouldn't say you would. Part of my thought was having them actually kind of formally weigh in was for the community to show that there is that united front. I mean, the coalition has the work of the coalition to do. Having the council say we endorse it, I think it's just extra, sort of want to find support, especially if there will be times down the road when we may want some type of investments, commitments around investments for housing. So I think having them kind of sign on in the early stages would be important for that. Because one of the things I want to make sure is that we stay in communication with them regularly and fully. And so I think that this will be one of those first steps too. But I do believe that the work of the coalition has to go forward in whatever shape, form, or fashion. That's a good question, though.
Thank you.
If I add to that, what I'd say is probably, I don't know, you correct me if you think of different smaller tests.
Yeah, had a little trouble hearing that, Derwin.
I'm sorry now. Is this better?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So one other thing I say about that is that I think from our original kind of announcement and charter from the council, making ongoing recommendations about different things around affordable housing. But as this comes forward as, a real initial comprehensive recommendations that we want to make, they did give us that sense of, we're going to create that housing plan for the city to adopt and move forward. And so kind of getting that approval from them is more what it looks like is what you're thinking, or I'm just trying to get a sense of that a formal adoption that we will get from them, how that sets apart kind of what we've been asked to do. Is it how it comes together, or is it the specifics of what we're working on?
No, I think it's not so much the specifics today, as much as yes, kind of confirming this is part of the task that you've been assigned as a coalition to come up with the recommendations and so forth, because ultimately, that's what would end up coming back to the council by way of a plan, our recommendations for how we should go about it. That's what the plan would be. And then if the council in the end would say, yes, we agree and we adopt these recommendations and agree that the city will, quote unquote, own a piece of this work, be it through staff, through resources, or what have you. So that's the end goal, is they receive the recommendations that will be contained in the plan for how we go about meeting those needs, and would formally adopt the final plan at the end. But I think at this juncture, it's okay, we see that you are picking up the work as we had envisioned and are starting along the process to understand what it is we actually need and how we should go about it. And you will come back to us with the formal final recommendations, which would be contained within that plan.
Got it.
Let me ask this question. Maybe it's a dumb question, but do we have Housing New Orleans on board with us to do the planning process that got outlined in the November meeting that we approved of? And if, I mean, and I guess part of that is, do we have the money to pay them, or is that one of the things that is waiting on council to agree that we should do this?
So Housing NOLA is willing and prepared to assist, because that's what I noted really as the technical assistance piece on the agenda. I think that for the group to decide is, do you in fact want to avail yourselves of that offer for technical assistance? And then if so, you know, then we can have some conversation and I can reach out to them about potential costs. I know we were provided with something earlier with just kind of a overarching idea of what some things could cost, but now if that is something that you'd want to have a more formal proposal on, you know, I can ask them to submit one. And I would, again, be willing to look at some potential resources that we might be able to contribute to some of that work that Housing NOLA could do. But I didn't want to go too far down that path before meeting with you all to see if in fact that is something you'd like to do.
Yeah. Well, just
Yeah.
my opinion, I think that it would be very helpful to have them to help provide that technical assistance. And, but I don't know what that means in terms of, does a contract with them have to go through council approval? Does it, or is there, I guess it depends on the amount of money and what kind of authority the manager has to approve a contract without going to council.
Right, right. I would hope that it wouldn't be one of those that so large that it'd have to go to council. Because there would just be the TA provider as opposed to like in the instance of what actually took place in New Orleans, you know, you had a whole group of folks who did a lot of stuff. And so, you know, you had that budget that Andrenica Morris shared with us that kind of picked up all of the different elements of the work. So, you know, and that would be part of what we would discuss with Housing NOLA. You know, what lane exactly are you going to be in? What part of the work will you carry? And then for all of the other pieces, you know, who carries that? Because I think that's another thing that we'll have to kind of figure out is, you know, who are some of the primary potential stakeholders and others that we would need. And I would suspect that at some point sooner rather than later, as we go about identifying some key stakeholders and what have you, that there may need to be some kind of steering committee, you know, that is a mix of both coalition members as well as community members, right? To start having that work unfold. So I would expect possibly that we would have a proposal and budget for whatever task Housing NOLA would do, and then have to look at other budget elements depending on the other pieces of the work that has to be done. Even like when they compensated some of the community members for doing parts of the work that the community members did, right? You know, will we have a similar process? What does that look like? How much is that? So I think, you know, we'd probably be looking at two different cost analysis. But I think we need to start with, okay, how much of this is Housing NOLA able to do? And then kind of guide us from there.
As I think this group has talked about before, you know, I think we do need somebody that can be the quarterback of this initiative and kind of work on it on a day-to-day basis between the committee meetings in addition to what this group is able to do. I'd add a kind of a third component to what you laid out, Marla. You know, I think having the expertise and the experience of Housing NOLA play a role here, and that technical assistance could be really valuable. I know we've had some conversations about if there was anybody, you know, local that could play that role. And I don't know that we've really had any organizations raise their hand or jump out at us, but I wonder if in that technical assistance they're providing to us, if there is somebody local that can, you know, learn that role and would want to take it on longer term, they, you know, Andrenica consider including them in those discussions so they can get up to speed, and that technical assistance also be provided to whomever that would be. And maybe there isn't someone, but I think we should consider, at least having that as part of the contract, so to speak, whatever the technical term for that agreement is, so that if we do identify that partner at some point, they can walk kind of alongside Andronika to learn that process and hopefully slowly take more ownership of it.
Okay, makes sense. Absolutely. Having our own local capacity is key, especially once we really get knee deep into implementation. So we'll still need somebody to kind of hold it like Housing NOLA holds it for New Orleans.
Right.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
I had an assumption implied there, but I'm curious. I mean, Marla, do you have anybody local that has kind of raised their hands to you or to other committee members that they would want to take on that type of quarterbacking role of a housing plan?
In the moment, I'll say no, but that is primarily because we have not, or I have not, specifically gone out and kind of tested the waters to see if there was interest and by whom and that kind of assessment. Just based on what I know to date, no one immediately came to mind. I know there are a number of folks who are having various conversations around housing, but it's been more of just a group of folks representing a lot of different interests in organizations and the like, but an existing organization today doesn't immediately come to mind. But I'm sure that as this work unfolds, that might be, one of the major tasks is who can that be that walks alongside Housing NOLA and starts to come on board with picking up parts of it. That's going to be critical for success, is to have somebody locally to hold this.
Yeah, I'll just say to that, Ryan, I agree. There's not a group or so that I think that, or a person that jumps out immediately to me in terms of holding it, but it was at least one organization that I was going to at least have a conversation with Marla about, that I thought had the initial kind of infrastructure experience and record in the community. Is actually one of the local CDCs that I thought may be able to have some help, some benefit to the process. Not sure if they would be able, and haven't even had any conversation with them about actually taking on this role. But just as we've been trying to think about and just thinking, where do things exist and how do you work without recreating everything from the ground up? Who has existing backbone infrastructure and those kind of things in place, that something like this would function well as an additional part of the work that they were doing. And that's why that one of the CDCs came to mind. But again, I've not talked to them at all, hadn't mentioned it or even inquired, just looking at what they do, thinking that it could potentially align.
So certainly I can reach out to Housing NOLA to confirm their interest and to ask what a proposal might look like, and ask them to formally submit something for your consideration. And Derwin, certainly I'd love to talk with you about your thoughts on some local capacity that could maybe be developed or supported to go along with what Housing NOLA does, and starts to grow into that role of being able to lead the process, certainly the plan implementation when we get to that point. And I know on here we have about determine the funding needs. Certainly, I think once we talk with Housing NOLA, that might give us a better sense of what some of the funding needs will be, and then how we go about, I guess, assembling the resources that it would take. Because certainly in order for the city to know what part we can bring to the table, we probably need to know the bigger picture of what's needed. Though I think that the city can really serve a role in kind of catalyzing and getting things started with the TA. So that's definitely a place that I think the city can be of value as we figure out the rest of the potential costs to pull this together. Any thoughts about communications and outreach? You know, and I know part of that's a timing situation. You know, do we start any kind of communications and outreach before we have a TA provider, or is that something that probably comes after we at least maybe have reached agreement in principle for a TA provider, and then maybe start the communications and the outreach with that to kind of let folks know, okay, we're gearing up? Any thoughts about that?
I mean, personally, I think the only reason to go out before that would be just to make sure people know we're still working. Other than that, you know, if there's nothing, you don't want to communicate a lot of hot air. So I think once we have something substantive to report, I think then, yeah, we gear up some communication, but I think we need to be purposeful about that too, not just to communicate for the sake of communication.
I agree. I do remember, you know, it was something that was listed in our notes that we needed to make sure we kept top of mind, you know, for transparency and all other reasons. You know, we wanted to make sure we were as open with the community as possible.
And I would imagine that that's something that marketing communications could help us with too. You know, they're great at putting together videos that can be put online, or helping with other forms of publicity that go out when we get to that stage.
Absolutely. I'm just making some notes. I think in some respects, the item number 5 on the agenda about potential organizations and entities, certainly I'll get with Derwin about any thoughts he has. And, you know, maybe if you all could also just think about who you know organizationally in the community who may have some strengths or skill sets in some part of this that could also play a role, because it doesn't. I think for starters, you know, that's, well, I guess I'm talking about 2 things. One, yes, we have that big picture, someone needs to kind of quarterback or lead it. But then I also think that we do need to start to think about who are key stakeholders we need to make sure are at this table from essentially day one. I do think we need to start thinking about that and building that list.
Marla, as you talk about that, is that something that you want us to start sharing names now, or emailing? You know, each committee member should share back, you know, by email some organizational names with you. What's the process for collecting that information in your mind?
Yeah, I think if you could email me names of the groups and the role that you think that they play, or the strength that they bring to the table, and or the importance of why they should be at the table, you know, and then we can kind of put that in a spreadsheet and start to look at not only what folks are bringing to the table, but then we can also say what are we missing, right? And who do we need, or what do we need that's missing? So I think that'll be a great tool for us to use. I'm still trying to get down some of the other notes too. So Ryan, I know the next big bullet under discussion was talking about the subcommittees. Oh, here comes Joe. Because we had talked about that last time about, maybe creating some subcommittees to do the work, or kind of take pieces of it and kind of lead. And then earlier in the meeting, Derwin mentioned something about, our working groups. So I guess one of the questions might be, do we start with our existing working groups, at least until, we have some, we may have, the TA provider on board. And then once we get that TA provider on board, then start to look at any kind of subcommittees or something, or see how they even align with our existing groups. I kind of want a sense of how we might want to tackle that. Hi, Joe.
Hey, Marla. Sorry, I hope you got my message about starting late, coming in later.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Derwin dropped off for a little bit, but he hopes to rejoin us.
Okay.
And Donna had a issue come up. She may be able to join us a little later.
Okay.
We
Sorry,
have
guys.
we have Lisa on, as well as Ryan and John still.
All right. Thanks.
And
Sorry, guys.
Paula.
Yep, I'm here.
I just want to say hello to Joe. He knows why I'm saying hello.
Yeah, we just left the same meeting.
Okay, got you.
I'm still in it, Joe.
Oh, yeah, you're chairing it, so you can't get out very easily.
No, I'm multitasking.
Yeah, you are. Okay, I'm sorry, Marla.
Oh, no worries.
Marla, can you maybe remind the group what our existing subcommittees are? And maybe a first step would be just thinking about if there's any alignment between that and the initial steps we need to do to get Housing NOLA or somebody engaged.
Sure, and I'm going to see if I can actually pull up one of our documents too, to make sure I don't miss anything. So we have the long-term planning is one. Let's see here, I'm just pull up the document because I don't want to rely totally on my memory.
Wasn't housing stock one or something like that?
Yeah.
Stock is one. Let's see here. I'm just trying to find a good set of notes that would have them listed. Of course, I didn't. Housing stock, long-term planning.
Access and services.
And there's a
Those
fourth
were the
one.
three. Long-term planning, housing stock, and access and services. There were three.
There's three. Okay, I was thinking there were four. Okay.
Well,
thanks,
there were
Joe.
three that's in as of March 2021. Those were the ones that we had in our past, unless you had another one that was developed after that.
No. Okay. So just the three. Long-term planning, housing stock, and access and services.
Those are the ones that I have on this agenda that we had in March of 2021.
Okay. So I would imagine that there will probably be some other committees that might need to be created. One question would be, do any of those kind of fit under one of those three banners of the working groups that we already have? And I think probably we might have a better sense of that once we sit down with the TA provider.
Yeah, it seems like, at least in my opinion, and welcome the committee's input, that a lot of that work will be decided once we've got the TA provider engaged. I wonder if there are critical items that we need the group to work on in advance of that engagement. I've heard two things, I believe, this morning. One is figuring out the budget component and how to pay for that TA and the selection process of that, and then secondarily the communications process, locally with others that should be involved. So I don't know if others have thoughts, but that's two that jumped out at me.
Top of my head, Ryan, I can't think of anything else, but yeah, those are, I think, who will, when we're talking with the TA, I mean, who will outline the, are we going to outline the scope as a group? Or, I mean, engaging the TA, that could be a subcommittee in itself.
So my initial thought is I plan to ask, what is it they are able and willing to provide, and then kind of build from there. Because one of my concerns is I'm not sure everything I need to ask for, right? Or what they're in a position to do or have the ability, or skill to do. So I think my first question to them is, what is it you're willing and able to provide us? And then, along with that ask is, so then what are the other things we need that you can't provide? And then we can, start to have a better conversation. And certainly, my goal would be to have some kind of proposal, an outline of potential scope items when we meet next month. So Joe, we're talking about reaching back out to Andrenica Morris to see if Housing NOLA could provide some TA to us.
Okay, because I was about to, I'm glad you said that, because in John's question, I was going to ask as well if the TA provider is a process where you have to do an RFP, since we're a city, and so you just don't go select somebody without, so you do have to put together an RFP. And that's where the scope will be. And so will Andrenica help us define the scope of what we ought to be thinking about or looking at? And, obviously Winston-Salem is very different than New Orleans from a needs and demographic perspective kind of thing. So I didn't know what that would look like. So
I wouldn't want, if we actually have to go the route of an RFP, which is one of the things that I'm trying to research on my end, if we had to go the route of an RFP, I wouldn't be comfortable asking a potential respondent to help me design it.
Oh, I know. Okay, so she might be a potential respondent.
Right. For the
okay.
TA.
Okay, I agree with that. I just thought she would be helping us put it together for someone other than Housing NOLA to be that would be applying for the response, for the job or whatever. So I agree with that.
So, so that's why I want to just kind of have that first conversation. Okay, what are the things that you can provide? What are the other things that we need to go down this path?
Yeah.
And then, and certainly ask her for what the things they could provide, what would that possibly look like in terms of cost?
Yeah.
And then figure out the rest of it, I do remember her stating that they used, I want to say 2 or 3 consultants in addition to the work that the community did, being Housing NOLA, the group that became Housing NOLA. They actually had a couple of different consultants on, a couple of different consultants who focused on some specific things, and so it could be that, we may do something similar depending on what those different things are that we might need that any other TA provider doesn't have as part of their strength or wheelhouse. But I think they looked for subject matter experts in different areas, and so had multiple consultants based on that. Okay.
I hate to keep coming back to the local piece, but just as you talked through that, the plan is obviously important, but having somebody as a result of the work that can carry the plan forward remains important in my mind. And so making sure that that's an outcome that we specifically outline, helping either an existing organization grow into that role or standing up a new organization to take ownership of that. Since I think this group is kind of settled on the city can't be the owner or shouldn't be the owner long term.
Mhm.
That's a good point, Ryan. That's a very good point. Because continuity will be very important for us to get anything done.
Well, we don't want another written document that doesn't get implemented, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
No, can't do that. We got a lot of work to do. So we have to have something that's actionable, and recognizing that a number of different stakeholders will own pieces of it, which is the good thing. And then whoever owns the big piece of it, kind of like we said earlier, kind of quarterbacks, coordinates, make sure everybody's handling the pieces they need to handle and that kind of thing.
Marla, you mentioned you were researching the RFP question. Do you have any context you can share with the committee as to what you currently think the trips would be that would require us to issue an RFP versus moving forward with Housing NOLA?
Sometimes we have situations where there aren't others who can provide a specialized something that you're needing, and you may only have somebody in your marketplace or what have you who can provide that specialized whatever it is. And so the question is, in this particular instance, would this meet that definition or not? So that's probably the biggest thing that I've got to have some conversation around. Is this of a nature that you don't have many people in the marketplace who can provide it?
Marla, I appreciate that. And and I'm glad Ryan asked that question because, there's been, again, every community is different, but there's been so much work done around North Carolina in particular around affordable housing. And I don't know who all the consultants are and who all the enterprises are that, either specialize in affordable housing or specialize in studying affordable housing. But we might be hard pressed to be able to say that Housing NOLA, because of their specific experience and what we're looking for, might be the only provider of this kind of service that we are going to be availing ourselves upon. I think we just have to be accountable. I don't want city council or other members of the public, thinking that we bypassed, first of all, North Carolina firms, and then even, heaven forbid, any Forsyth County or Triad firms that were able to do that same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why it's important. We were talking earlier about sending names to me of organizations and so forth who can own some of this work, and again, be it the Triad, Winston, or the state, because certainly I'm not aware of a lot of what is going on outside of kind of where I sit. So would definitely need guidance there.
But to Ryan's point about going forward, I think we're going to need the expertise, and this is where we won't be relying on city staff, you in particular, to guide the work once, even when it's parceled out to the various organizations or experts that can do the different parts of it. Somebody will have to ride herd over the entire process.
Right.
And that individual or that firm or whoever it is, I think is going to be key in the accountability piece about, how things get done, when they get done, where they get done, and that kind of thing. So I think that's an important piece that we have to keep in mind as well.
For sure. And they need to be local.
Right. And that was going to be my point.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. So we had talked about, do we identify an organization right now who may not have the capacity today, may have some strengths that with some TA and training and support could grow into that entity.
Right.
Or, are we looking at the potential of having to stand up something new, which is what Housing NOLA was. It was stood up,
Mhm.
So there are some of those kind of considerations that we still have to work through.
Okay.
Where I feel like it's a bit of a chicken or the egg conversation. Again, I'm curious what everybody else thinks, but it's, if we have to do an RFP, then, you know, once you issue it, you got to have kind of the ability to pay for it, right? So that people know that they're responding for it, or what they're responding to. And so then we come back to the question of how do we do that? And is there funding in place from council or within the departmental budget to accomplish that? And it sounded like that's still an open question as well, Marla.
So as you were talking, one thing hit me. It may be in the initial phase, rather than an RFP, we do a request for qualifications. You know, what are the things we need?
Right.
And how many folks are out here who can give us what we need? And then that way we don't get bombarded with a bunch of stuff and potentially prices all over the place. But I do think that we can have, you know, Housing NOLA gave us something previously that kind of showed what it cost them. And, you know, what those dollars look like in today's dollars, you know, I think we'll need to get a better understanding of that. But at least we had an idea of what it cost them to do the work.
Right.
So, you know, in having a conversation about, again, like if I asked them, okay, what could you possibly provide, and what else would we maybe need? And that wouldn't just be a one-on-one. I mean, that would be an initial conversation, but I do think there needs to be a larger conversation with you all about what all do we need after we kind of see a breakdown of the different things that they used and had or whatever. Certainly the city can put something towards this. I mean, that part we know. The question will be either, you know, how much or when or what piece, you know, like I was thinking that, you know, at the very least to get us started with the TA, I think would be a good place, because then that provides us not only time to get a better sense of overall cost, but then time also to look at how to raise some of the other resources. But if the city could kind of tee it up, then that gives us a little bit more time to work out some of the other parts, if that makes any sense.
That does make sense, and it's a good strategy. I was sitting here just thinking, and you know, putting my old philanthropy hat back on. I wish there were a funding organization in Forsyth County. I won't say in town, but in Forsyth County, that had affordable housing as one of its primary focuses or as one of its you know, strategy areas. And this is what, you know, and I think Andrenica addressed this. This is what Housing NOLA did. There were several foundations in Louisiana that came to the fore to help put money in to get Housing NOLA started. It wasn't all, you know, city of New Orleans money that went into that. So there was some private fundraising that took place, and I think it was led by a couple of foundations, one in particular, if I'm not mistaken,
right,
which is the piece that we've been kind of missing, if you would, kind of thing. So I think if we had that, that would help alleviate some of the dependence and reliance on any city funding at all, or, you know, and maybe more on, you know, city in-kind support as opposed to direct financial support, which we all know carries some things with it, kind of stuff. So I wish there were a local, you know, and obviously Ryan's on, but I mean, if you think about our financial institutions in town, you know, and I used to be in this position well. So, you know, when we give money, when I was at Wachovia Bank and the Wachovia Foundation, we wanted to make sure that we were a part of the solution as well as a business, because you wanted your philanthropic money to help support your business lines as well, kind of thing. So so you don't typically get the unrestricted money, if you would, you know, in quotes, unless you get it from a source that doesn't really have to worry about subsequent business being done with that particular organization.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know who that funding source is.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree, Joe. I think that's been one of the hurdles here for affordable housing more broadly in the community,
Right.
is because it's not a focus of
Exactly.
you know, anyone, or hasn't been for a number of years. I think it was for a while. Right. But to your point, I mean, in the other communities where these have really gained traction, it's been through kind of the philanthropic community bringing,
Right.
you know, not just the grants to get the work off the ground, but some of the first loss capital and the actual tools to
Right.
drive additional units as well.
Yeah.
They're a crucial partner.
That's right. And that's the same process we're trying to go through with this purpose-built communities concept as well at Boston Thurman. I mean, other purpose-built communities around the country have really been started by philanthropic organizations that are that put in pretty significant amounts of money to get those things started before they're really able to get into these, you know, to these designated communities and start doing things. So same concept.
Ryan, based on the work that Truist and certainly BB&T has done before, and you know, I'm thinking of Charlotte and maybe some other communities, you know, are there some models that you think we could start to look at? And I'm thinking about them more on the resource side for implementation. You know, are there any models that you have found particularly successful that we could start to kind of get our arms around to see what could potentially work in Winston, you know, with some adjustments, obviously, for our market?
I mean, I think a lot of this goes back to Joe's point a moment ago. It's been where we've seen the, you know, to really get traction. There's either an organization that's focused on affordable housing that's able to go out and raise the resources, either nationally or locally, that has expertise in affordable housing. You know, there are a couple of national community development organizations that I think we probably all know that do that work. Yeah. And where those haven't existed, it's been, you know, a coalition of community, primarily philanthropic leaders, you know, the leading, you know, I'm thinking about Charlotte, it was kind of the leading community foundation that brought everybody together and said, this is important. And this, you know, there's public resources available, but there need to be additional resources to accomplish the work. So that's, I mean, over the past couple of years where I've seen that traction, you know, where those initiatives really gain traction. And again, this goes back to the kind of, what do we do first piece of it. I think if we as a coalition or the, you know, or who is being looked to initiate those conversations at this point, we kind of need maybe that RFQ that you were talking about to be able to go back to that, you know, to our partners in the community and the leaders in the community and say, here is what we think we need to get going. Will you play a role in that? And to Joe's point, you know, hopefully everybody will see kind of the tie to both the needs in the community and the work that each of those groups is doing.
So I'm going to ask a question, and because I truly don't fully have my arms around the community in this regard. And I know earlier we mentioned about key stakeholders to have at the table in terms of doing the work and needing to have their voice and their participation. And it may, I don't know if it's something that you want to kind of call out while we're here, or just email me, or how you want to do it, or email the whole group, but who are the key folks that we need to have that big conversation with? You know, just like you maybe have philanthropy and some other players in Charlotte or some other communities, you know, what's the infrastructure here? Or what are the dynamics here? And who are the, for lack of a better word, the players here who we need to have a conversation with? I mean, if affordable housing was a need and a priority at one time in the past, who all was involved in that effort then? And are they still around? Do we need to go back to them? You know, where are we with that kind of engagement or potential engagement?
And John, you or Ryan or Paula, if you're still on, you know, anybody else, you know, please feel free to chime in. But let me think through some things with your question, Marla, because it's a good one. Because obviously the landscape has changed in corporate makeup, as well as individuals that are here that care about the community. Not that those that are here now don't care about it, but obviously we've got quite a few organizations that are now on that side of the Winston-Salem Triad area, kind of even outside of North Carolina. But to your question, I think that the kind of audience we need, and I think that you try to get a kind of small, concise group, but very powerful group to begin with. And you think about affordable housing and all the things that affordable housing means to this community and to this area. Obviously you go with the major funding organizations, which is, the KB Reynolds Charitable Trust, the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation, and the Winston-Salem Foundation from a philanthropic standpoint. And then you got to look at the medical centers as well. Both medical centers really have a strong interest in affordable housing for their staff. If for no other reason, affordable housing has been linked to one of, several of the social determinants of health. And so there's a way to connect that, which is what we have to get good at doing, is connecting these consequences that affordable housing causes. So you got that. And then you've got the major financial institutions that operate foundations within our community that has a stake in seeing the community do well. And then of course, that's also gets into a part of their business as well. So to me, those, and there may be some other corporate entities that I'm not thinking about, whether it be, airlines, or whether it be manufacturing or service entities that have sprung up or that have been around that would have an interest in that same that same concept or strategy.
So this is this is not a non sequitur. This is somewhat related, but I was involved in a development over in Greensboro, where over there the Community Foundation of Greater Greensboro does a lot of they take the lead on a lot of projects.
Right.
With the tornado relief, they
Right.
set up a fund that the people could give money to, and then they act as fiscal agent and the organizer in a lot of things. And one project that I'm familiar with in particular is Eastern Triad Workforce Development. And the relevance here is that project is the foundation acts as a fiscal agent. They go out and get state funds. So they go and get allocations, direct funds from the state. It goes to the foundation, which then acts as a fiscal agent and management of the fund, that then goes out to Rockingham County, Randolph County, Alamance County, and Guilford County, and different workforce development programs that are operated within those counties through community colleges, community groups, whatever. So the foundation takes this, but they work with the chamber, the Greensboro Chamber and the High Point Chambers, because they're interested in workforce development. Right. So it's a coalition of these groups that then they go to the state legislative delegation and say, hey, we're trying to raise money. We need $4.5 million this year for all of these workforce groups. And so, to Joe's point, I don't know who that is in Forsyth County, but in my mind, that's what I'm envisioning is that group, even if they don't have expertise in housing, they could have expertise in managing the process and working with community groups. And they become the ones who are responsible for kind of driving it and organizing it. So the foundation is the one who will, if you need a meeting with all of the stakeholders in that workforce group, they call that meeting and it happens. Yeah. So that's kind of what I'm envisioning for us with this group. And I don't know who that would be in Winston.
John, I think some of those names, some of the either names or organizations I called is what you're exactly talking about. Yeah. And obviously the equivalent to the Community Foundation of Greater Greensboro is the Winston-Salem Foundation. Yeah. Which they have played that role before, as a matter of fact. Project Impact was one of those roles they played with it as far as coalescing around an educational issue as opposed to housing.
And I think the more groups that we can get involved, I think to Joe's point about the hospitals, all the employers here are interested in affordable housing. Absolutely. I ran some numbers the other day, just so you guys know, the active listings in I was just looking at Forsyth County and Guilford County, the active listings for houses right now, 5 years ago, this time there were a couple of thousand active listings. Now they're down to about 300 or 400, which
Really?
is less than a month's supply of housing.
Really?
Yeah. And if you look at the development level, it's still half of what it was in 05. This is for market rate housing, but still it's half of what it was, and our population has grown by 10, 15%. So we're dealing with an increasing problem. So my point is, from the business community's perspective, they need a place for their people to live.
Oh,
right. So I know we're talking about affordable housing, but it's all related. And their interest would be in making sure that we don't create we don't have a growing affordable housing problem, and a growing housing shortage problem. So they have a vested interest in this, and pulling them in, I think, would be wise.
I think you're right, John. And obviously the two announcements that were made this week from a economic development standpoint is going to be huge toward that very same thing. I mean, it's scary to think about what this, I mean, as good as that sounds from an investment standpoint, the issues and the challenges that comes with it can be daunting.
Sure. Yeah, believe me, it's one of the things I wake up every day and think about.
I bet.
So Joe, I think and Ryan both, I think you've both hit on the point. We need to identify, I think you'd asked earlier about what kind of committees we might need. I think that's a work item that we need to hammer out. Really, I mean, we could probably do that before the next meeting, is just pull together that list of viable candidates and who might, and then talk about approaching them and seeing what we can do.
But I do think it's important to have them all together at one time, so they all hear the same message, the same story, the same request, if that's what it's going to be, but they get consistent information.
Yeah. If nothing else, we need to put on the radar is this is a critical issue for the community.
Absolutely.
If you're not already active in it, you need to be.
Good point.
So John, when you talk about that as an action item, just trying to get down into the nuts and bolts of it. So identify the organizations, then maybe circulate within this committee that listing, and folks can perhaps raise their hands and say, I've got a connection here, a connection there. And then by the next committee meeting, we can begin to, have that listing of who potential leaders are in the community they should engage in this issue, and how we will do that. Is that a fair?
Yeah, I think that's, you hit the nail on the head.
So Marla, can we add that to the listing of organizations we as committee members should be sending to you, and then we can aggregate that and send it back out to the group?
You're on mute, Marla. Sorry.
Sorry, caught it. Yes. So then that way, so there'll be two lists then that we'll be compiling. One is, I don't know how you want to frame or describe that one group that we were just discussing, but then we've got the second group of entities and agencies and whomever who really just need to be at the table. And almost a third list, and that is who could potentially hold this work. So maybe there are three lists we're trying to compile, just ideas.
I think who should be at the table and who could potentially do the work, that's a pretty strong overlap, in my opinion. Welcome others to chime in there. The name of that first list, I think, is community leaders and potential funders that should be engaged around affordable housing.
Okay.
So I'd like to personally circle back to this kind of RFP conversation in the event that we can make some progress there. Is that something we feel like you need input from us, Marla, to move forward, or do you want to take the next step with Housing NOLA first, or how do we kind of break that into components before the next meeting?
Good question. I think I probably should have a conversation with Housing NOLA first, so I can get a sense of some of the components. I mean, I know she shared some things with us. So I'd like to get some feedback and then bring that back to you before doing anything formally around creating an RFQ.
Can you educate me on what the RFQ process is and how we could be supportive if that's a direction that you feel we need to go? Is that something that you would be able to draft and would need us to review? And then we've got, like, can you just take us through the process there?
Sure. So, obviously very similar to the RFP, but what I would be looking for is organizations, firms, or whomever who can do the various elements that we need from a technical assistance standpoint. And then being able to, and this is where you all would be very helpful, identify who I need to send that to see if they are interested in submitting their qualifications to do whatever elements that we need. So if, for example, and I'd have to think through how it would be structured, since the RFQ just kind of came to me this morning, would we have a document that maybe lists 5 key areas that we need expertise in? And then the question is, do you have expertise in any of these areas? Which ones? Give us the breakdown, so that then we can decide once those come back, then if we want to do an actual request for proposal, we can be more targeted in whom we issue those requests to get a proposal back to do the work. But at least it kind of helps us understand what we have in the landscape. Because I mean, ideally, that when we think about local and local, in this case, I'm going to use, I'll say the state, if there are organizations here, who can do some of this work, I would definitely like to target them to receive the RFQ and then ultimately the RFP. But like I said, I don't know who is around. And so, and obviously what they all do and how well they do it. I know there's some groups who, do the financing stuff, and different elements, but who everybody is and what they bring to the table and their availability even at this point, I would need to know who they are and if they're willing to come to the table. And then if they are interested, then we send them, the request for a proposal and kind of break it down in more detail in terms of what we're looking for and with the scope. Did that help?
Help me. Others have questions? Sounds like a lengthy process from a timing perspective. So if we don't make a decision on it today, we decide to engage on something in the February meeting, what would you envision the timing being from that point forward? So the RFQ, if I understood you correctly, wouldn't actually give us the ability to engage somebody. It would just be kind of data collection. That would be open for a period of time. We'd review it and then need to issue an RFP, I guess, if you had enough responses that would require it.
Right. Best case scenario. Well, 2 things. Best case scenario, we maybe could have an RFP out and responses back. Best case scenario, May. But I'd also say that there is still work that we could be doing while that process is going on. like continuing to identify community stakeholders who need to be at the table and teeing up other elements that we know need to be done and don't necessarily require a TA provider to get us started on. And granted, we'll have to identify some of the things, right? But I do think that there are still some things that we would be able to advance while we're going through that process, if that's the route we have to go.
It is Derwin. I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yep. It just on the TA piece, are we speaking to, because when I came back in, you were already kind of in the throes of the conversation. Are we talking about specifically the things that Housing NOLA would do, or the additional function and support of some of the things they would do? And the reason I asked that question is just to understand, just even with the city, I know that there's under a certain dollar amount, you don't technically have to go through some of the selection pieces that you would normally have to go through. And so wondering if we're talking about a higher dollar, a lower dollar to the point of timing, and, or do we feel we have the time to go through the process that it will normally go through with the longer requests for proposals?
So ideally, we would be under that threshold for, the full-blown RFP and/or council kind of approval. That would be ideal, and certainly, that could move us along much quicker. I do think, though, there will be a need to do some requests for proposals ultimately, as we start to look for some of the subject matter experts. If we were able to engage a TA provider without having to go through some of the other processes, then, part of the work that the TA provider could do is help us identify what are those subject matters where we need the experts that we would have to solicit. And so again, you could have different things going on parallel tracks. There's some work that the TA provider can be helping us walk through while we're also looking for some of those experts to carry individual pieces of the work. Did that answer your question, Derwin? I want to make sure.
It did. It did. And just for me, I think that could be helpful and just in the time and just the facilitation if that was a particular route, but that's just my thought.
Okay. So I think one of the things that I want to make sure I'm clear on is what I'll kind of call the next steps or the action items for next time, so that make sure that I'm on point. So of course, I'll be reaching out to Housing NOLA just for some more general information about the kinds of things that they provide and the kinds of things that they think we might need that they don't provide, to just kind of understand the landscape. I know I'll be looking into what's required in order to use any city money to get some TA assistance, and what the parameters are in terms of when an RFP is needed or not, and the dollar thresholds. So I can assemble all of that information and have that for next time. I know you all are going to send us lists of different names for different categories that we'll kind of combine and circulate around the group to see who might be some of those community leaders and potential funders that we need to engage, who might who are the stakeholders who we need to make sure are at the table as the work unfolds. Might need to look at some kind of communications piece that goes out that just kind of lets the public or community know that the coalition is actively working towards a goal of spearheading the creation of a housing plan. So those are the main action items I have noted. Have I missed anything?
Marla, as part of that initial review with Housing NOLA and RFQ funding thresholds that you're talking about, do you envision sharing back with the group, I guess in February, here's the amount that we feel like the city can put towards it, and based on what we've heard, kind of the initial steps we feel like we could take within an RFP or outside it, and then ask the committee to look at the other things that Housing NOLA has laid out, and that would be the type of thing that we would need to go and start having those community conversations. Is that kind of the
Right.
steps you're envisioning?
Yes.
Does that approach work for the committee members?
This is
Does to
Donna.
me, Ryan.
That sounds good to me.
That's me.
Okay. Got a game plan.
And
And
Marla,
Marla, if you need me to, this is Dawn, if you need any assistance from me, just let me know. I know I've been kind of here in the background, in and out, for various reasons, but if there's anything that I could do to help the team, I'm definitely willing. Some of it is limited knowledge for me, but I'm willing to dig in and do whatever I can to help the team.
Thank you.
and Marla, do we send these lists to you, or do we send them to the entire group? Or I'd rather send it to you, and then you can send it out to
Yeah.
the group.
Yeah, because then we can compile them, create a spreadsheet,
Right.
and maybe do one document with different tabs, so we all have it in one place.
Okay.
Yeah, we can do that.
And Marla, I'm sorry I had to miss most of the meeting, but I'd love to give you a call and just get caught up on,
Okay.
what discussed.
Sure, absolutely. Okay. So I guess the question is, any other discussion based on the agenda for those two items that we have noted? So if not, of course, I have down some updates. I had reported to you all previously that we had found a consultant to help, or not help, but to actually perform the assessment of the continuum of care. And we just finally finalized the contracts about a week ago. So they should be starting their work in February, and we're expecting it to take about 6 to 8 months to do the work. And so we'll keep you apprised of that. And some of you could potentially get an invitation maybe to be part of a focus group or discussion along the way. So, but I'll definitely give you a heads up if, we would extend that offer to you. It'd be depending on what the kinds of folks the consultants want to talk with. One of the things that we did stress, though, is in the recommendations that might come out of this assessment, one of the things that was critical is that the work needs to align, any recommendations around housing needs to align with whatever we do as far as that overarching housing plan. I think up until now, it's been handled in a silo, where there's homelessness support and housing, and then there's the rest. And it's homes, that people need. So my position is that these need to be integrated, and we need to remove the silos. So that's why there may be some interaction with you all, because we want to make sure that whatever the plan is that is developed covers everybody along the income spectrum who needs a home. And
I agree with that, Marla, but I was going to ask, and I think you just answered it, because I wasn't quite connecting the continuum of care, if that was around homelessness, and I'm assuming it is, and the assessment that's being done is an assessment of the COC that's already in place or something. I'm not. Yes. Is that okay? Yes.
Okay. The existing continuum of care, and we're doing an assessment both of the programmatic and operational side of things, as well as the governance.
Okay. And is Andrea Kurtz involved with that, or will she be involved or not?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all of the agencies who are members of the COC will be part of the assessment.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And assess themselves, right? I hope.
The agencies assess themselves?
Yeah.
Or you mean the COC? I'm sorry, Darren, I missed it. I'm sorry.
No, I'm saying, and like the agent, like the folks, like the governance, all that, that's all they will be assessed. They'll be a part of it, but the consultants will be assessing them and the operations itself.
Correct.
As
Correct.
a part of, okay, yeah. Got
mm-hmm.
it. Yeah.
Top to bottom, yeah, a thorough 360 kind of deal.
Marla, how many organizations is that in that COC?
Well, that's one of the interesting dynamics. There are a ton of organizations who claim membership in the COC, but you have a very small subset, if you will, of those organizations who do the direct service delivery around providing shelter, case management, and supportive services.
And is the assessment to determine if they're being effective, or, I mean, what's the outcome for the assessment?
We're looking at effectiveness, how to enhance both service delivery and the types of services that are offered. So yeah, how do we strengthen and enhance this network such that we start to make a significant dent in the people who are experiencing homelessness?
And I'm assuming that part of that assessment will be talking to the consumers of those services?
Oh yeah, for sure, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah.
And I having worked directly in this space, I will say, and I'm happy to see such an assessment take place, and to hopefully see how that can enhance how things operate amongst that space. Because when we think about housing and where we are in that space and what we look to do in terms of impact, that space functioning properly helps a whole lot with the things that we look to do and how we're able to help and support. And so when that is not effective across the board, it causes other challenges. And so I look forward to the report and how they do their work.
Okay. Thank you.
Marla, quick question. This is and it's, I apologize because I missed the last meeting, so I wasn't sure about this. This is not a HUD directed review. This is a self-review.
This is the city wanting to do a review.
Gotcha.
Based on our experience and interactions with the agencies that we're funding and who are responsible for doing the work. We just thought it was time to really get our arms around it. We have observations as staff, and sometimes it's difficult for people to hear our observations and our concerns or accept some of the changes that we put into place. And so we thought that it would probably be better for the entire community if we had an independent third party do an assessment. Because our homeless number of people who are experiencing homelessness, the numbers are very high. and uncomfortably high in light of the size of this community. And so that has called into question effectiveness, and not just by staff, but some of our elected officials as well. And so we just thought it was time that we take a step back and just assess.
Well, I'm glad, just, you know, to echo what Derwin said, it's time for this assessment to take place, and I'm looking forward to it as well. And to Paula's question about how many agencies, I can just tell you that when I was in the work, as far as funding some of these agencies, there were, I'd say between 30 and 35 agencies that claimed to be a part of the COC. So it was quite a few. Now, whether some of those are still operating or not, I don't know, but there were between 30 and 35 agencies that were part of the COC at the time. This is, you know, 3 or 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Probably still about the same, maybe a few more faces.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
And I'll just add one.
Sorry, go ahead,
John.
Derwin.
I was just going to add just one other thing on that, is just in, you know, just like everything else with COVID, you know, it showcased, just like we're dealing with in the housing side and how it's exacerbated things. I think COVID, even within the COC, when you put pressure on the system, you know, it shows you where you have your weak points. And if you are intentional about, you know, continuous improvement, you want to make sure you're taking care of those weak points. You know, you can't keep moving past them. And so my hope is that, you know, that this will help, you know, begin to look at where those weak points are and how we can address them. Because I think that some have existed for some time, and, you know, we gotta figure it out. But yeah, looking forward to it. And I'll just as an aside, Mar, I was gonna text you this, but I was gonna say, go if you can add me to the interview list, I would love to be able to talk to the consultants.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
We'll do that. John, you were gonna say something?
Just that I'm having deja vu because I served on the board of the group that's fiscal agent for the COC in Greensboro, and I happened to be lucky enough to be chair when they were going through some massive changes over there in their COC. And so I will say that they had a change in leadership on the COC board. I won't bore you all with all the details that happened over 5 years and all the transitions, but if you have somebody you want to talk to about what that process looked like, I am happy to send you her name. She's a volunteer. This was the volunteer chair. So this is not staff. This is the volunteer chair of the COC. And she did some amazing things over there. So they've made the improvement in the COC over there has been fast, and it's been pretty astounding. And it took the buy-in of all the agencies. And I will say that your point about there are many who identify as being part of the COC. That group is much larger than the group who are active in the COC. But it's a bit of herding cats for sure. But yeah, so they're still in the midst of making all those transitions and improvements, but there are some real lessons to be learned, and I'd be happy to connect you with
Please.
the person who chaired over there.
Okay, yeah, I'd love that. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Okay. You'll see that we still have a couple of openings with staff, and we've been interviewing for the other 2 positions and have identified potential staff members and just waiting for the formal HR process. The other 2 positions that we had on here, one was the COC program coordinator, and then the other was the Choice Neighborhoods project manager, because we lost our project manager back in November, and we actually just had interviews for that yesterday, and waiting on one more score. Oh, I see it now. So I think we have a candidate to select. So we're making some progress on kind of rebuilding our staff and building up in some other areas. The housing development manager, that second bullet, is where we're looking for somebody with real estate development experience. And this person would project manage any of the projects that the city would sponsor or send out RFPs for. That staff person would oversee those projects. And then our housing programs manager, that's the position that April Jacobs held before. We did interviews for that one. We haven't found a suitable candidate yet, so we're going to re-advertise for that one. But we've been moving along. And then the last item is our meeting schedule. And, you know, I know we've talked about maybe activating the work groups again. So I think we had just said when we came back to the new year, we'd talk about how we wanted to kind of position ourselves. Do we want to continue the full group meetings every month, or do we want to do a hybrid where we meet and then we do the groups? So just kind of wanted some feedback from you all, and then I can put together the calendar for the year and get that out to you.
My personal thought is until we have, you know, more tactical items for the work groups to tackle, we continue to meet as a full committee. This isn't an unwieldily large group, if that's a word. So, you know, that's just my thought.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Okay.
But once we do have those, I think that the work group work will be very important though.
Agree.
Sure.
Okay. And we'll stay on the fourth Friday and same time. That still works for everyone? Okay.
Yeah, as long as we can keep the Winston-Salem Foundation from calling meetings at the same time. So
Just tell them they have to start joining this one then.
Exactly.
I don't think that's going to happen again. So
But so that's two of you all, is it not? Paula and Joe, both of you all?
yep.
Yeah.
Yep. But that's fine. I think the schedule works well the way it is.
Okay. Very good. Very good. Well, Derwin, Ronnie, no, you guys, chair, vice chair, or the rest of you, any other items you think would be good for the group to discuss?
I had two quick report things to share with the group. One was real quick in reference to they had an invite, wasn't able to participate with them initially, but it was, so we talked about the Continuum of Care, but the Homeless Coalition itself invited me to come and speak to that group about the work of the Affordable Housing Coalition. And so I have been rescheduled to come to their February meeting to just share what we're doing and how we're working. I have to figure that out with them because I do have a facilitating a retreat at Renolda on that day. So if there's somebody else who may want to help or join in on that conversation with them, feel free to let me know and I can maybe swing you in or out on that one. But if not, I'll make it work in speaking to them. And then secondarily, it's just a brief update on the, I'm not sure if it was spoken on when I jumped off the call, but the accessory dwelling unit, the change in the ordinance, where that stood. The council had voted to pause the process and that to give time for some additional community update. That happened this past week. I kind of sat in on that call to listen. Our name came up multiple times in that conversation about the work we were doing and even our recommendation for it. And in the comments on there were most people looking at how they could engage with us. And so there was a lot. I saw particular areas of folks of interest wanting to know how they could support the work. That was actually one of the specific questions. How can we support the work of the Affordable Housing Coalition? Seeing that we had made the recommendation in support of it. So just at least wanted to kind of share that and just let you know that conversation and what was happening.
Darwin, what's the date of the meeting next month where you need to make the presentation to the Commission on Ending Homelessness?
It is it the 17th? Yeah, the 17th at 2:30 is when the meeting starts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That way, if anybody else can pitch in, they'll know the date and time.
Okay.
All right. Anything else from staff?
Nothing from me.
All right.
Marlon, this is not staff, but I just thought I'd say again, with the meeting schedule, the Fridays work, but as the weather gets warmer, I'll have to let you know how my schedule goes. So I just thought I'd put that out there in full disclosure.
I understand. You have an iPad, iPhone, WhatsApp.
I'll be responsive to my responsibilities if I have to get your information, kind of thing. But that time does tend to interfere a time or two, so I'll just let you know.
Okay, I appreciate it. All right. All right. Well, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, anything else before we close out?
I'm good.
None for me.
All right. Well, thank you all. And I'll be looking for some emails from you, and you may be getting some from me too with updates on the information as I gather it.
Okay, great.
All
Let me
right.
ask you real quick. Is Paul still a member of the group?
Yes, he was with us earlier.
Okay, all right.
He
Sorry,
signed off just a few moments before you signed on.
Okay, I just want to make sure I like having his voice in the room, so thank you. Okay.
Yes, he was with us earlier. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, you all take care.
All right,
Take
bye-bye.
care.
All right, bye.